where the lack of proportion, the lack of ability to think straight can be called anything except insanity. It says, you may think this is an extreme case. To us it is not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always a curious mental phenomenon that, parallel with our sound reasoning, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check. The insane idea won out. Next day we would ask ourselves in all earnestness and sincerity how it could have happened. In some circumstances we've gone out deliberately to get drunk, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. But even in this type of beginning, we are obliged to admit that our justification for a spree was insanely insufficient in the light of what always happened. We now see that when we begin to drink deliberately instead of casually, there was little serious or effective thought during the period of premeditation of what the terrific consequences might be. Our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. Now, this guy just tickled me to death. I certainly do not understand it. And I don't know what it is that he can possibly get out of this deal, but he gets something out of it. It said he gets a thrill out of skipping in front of fast-moving vehicles. You can almost see this guy running out in the street and just daring them to run over him, seeing how close they can get to him without being hit. Now, he enjoys himself for a few years, in spite of friendly warnings. The people are probably saying, hey, Jack, you ought to quit doing that. You know, you're going to get hurt someday. Up to this point, you would label him as a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Well, luck then deserts him, and he's slightly injured several times in succession. He's probably getting a little older. He can't move as fast. They begin to hit him once in a while. Not bad. Just kind of bouncing off of him. Now, you would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. But presently he's hit again, this time it has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. He tells you he's decided to stop jaywalking for good. He sings their national anthem. He said, I'm never going to jaywalk again as long as I live. But in a few weeks, he breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. Finally, he can no longer work. The boss finally gets tired of that and says, I'm going to have to let you go. The wife gets a divorce. She says, I'm tired of you laying up in the hospital all the time, me supporting you and the kids and everything else. And of course, he's held up to ridicule. Now, he tries every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. Not his body, his head. He shuts himself up in a treatment center hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races in front of a fire engine which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? Now, you may think our illustration is too ridiculous. But is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects where alcohol has been involved, we have been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? And many of us could work okay from time to time. Many of us could do things that normal people do most of the time. But when it comes to alcohol, we seem to have been strangely insane. That warning switch that tells us not to do certain things doesn't seem to work when it comes to alcohol. So in the beginning, all we're really concerned about is this insanity, is the fact that when it comes to alcohol, we cannot always see the truth. We're strangely insane. Now, later on, I found out I wasn't too swift in a lot of other areas also. But in the beginning, all I'm looking at is just alcohol, period. Now, some of you are thinking, yes, what you tell us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. We admit we have some of these symptoms, but we've not gone to the extremes you fellows did, nor are we likely to, for we understand ourselves so well after what you have told us that such things cannot happen again. We have not lost everything in life through drinking, and we certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. Well, that may be true of certain non-alcoholic people. Remember the hard drinker who drank like the alcoholic? And if a sufficient reason presented itself, they just quit drinking or learned to moderate. That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavily at the present time, are able to stop or moderate, because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as ours were. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. This is a point we wish to emphasize and re-emphasize. To smash home upon our alcoholic readers, as has been revealed to us out of bitter experience, let us take another illustration. And we want to take a moment to look at Fred. Fred is in a different situation. You know, Jim didn't feel too good. Jim didn't have a very good job. He was working for a concern he once owned. Things wasn't too good for Jim. And Jim ended up getting drunk. But now Fred is a different ball of wax entirely. Fred is a guy that is on top of the world. And I think this illustration is designed to show us that we don't have to feel bad to get drunk. Now we can also get drunk whenever we're feeling good. Let's look at Fred and let's see when he became insane.
Well, Fred is a part in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home, is happily married, father of promising children of college age. He's so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it was Fred. See, so we see Fred is a lot different shape than Jim was in. To all appearance, he is stable, well-balanced, yet he is alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of jitters. It was his first experience of this kind. He was much ashamed of it, far from admitting he was an alcoholic. So he wouldn't take step one. Jim took 1, 2, and 3. Fred would even take 1. He told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. The doctor emulated that strongly that he might be worse than he realized. For a few days he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him, but perhaps he not do so, in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself as an alcoholic, step 1. Much less accept spiritual remedy for his problem. He wouldn't accept step 2. So Fred, he was kind of hard-headed. He said, we told him what we knew about alcoholism. They told him step 1. He wouldn't buy it. He was interested and conceded he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting he could not do nothing about himself. He was positive that his humiliating experience plus the knowledge he had acquired would keep him sober for the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. We heard no more from Fred for a while. One day we were told he was back in the hospital. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told us is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all other concerns, yet he was flat on his back nevertheless. Let him tell you about it. Fred said, I was much impressed with you fellows said about alcoholism. I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your idea about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink. But I was convinced it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, and I was usually successful in making other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men had failed. I felt I had every right to be self-confident. That would only be a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on going. In the frame of mind I went about my business for a time, all was well. I had no trouble refusing drink, and I began to wonder if I had been making too hard a work out of this simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I had been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, and let's begin to listen to this, how he's feeling. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and you, my partners, would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon.
Boy, this guy's floating, isn't he? He is feeling good.
He's feeling good. I went to my hotel and leisurely dressed for dinner. Now listen, look at the squiggly writing now. This is the insanity when we see that squiggly writing. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails with dinner. That was all, nothing more. And this guy had a great day. He had this trip to go to Washington. He went up there and he did this business. He knew his party would be satisfied and everything had a good day. It was on a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. And it's one a beautiful day, and he walks in the dining room and says, oh, this is one of the great days. I believe I'll have a drink and go back to the hospital. This is the truth. You know, what a great day to go back to the hospital. This is insanity, you know. Nothing more. And then after he took it, he said, I ordered a cocktail and dinner and my meal. I ordered another cocktail. Now the craving's taking over. After I did, I decided to take a walk. Then I decided to return to the hospital. It struck me a highball would be fine before going to bed. I stepped in the bar and had one. I remember having several more that night and plenty the next morning. I have a shadowy recollection of being in an airplane bound for New York. Finally, a friendly taxicab driver at the landing field instead of my wife. The driver escorted me about for several days. I know where I went, what I said and did. Then came the hospital and the unbearable mental and physical suffering. As soon as I regained my ability to think, I carefully reviewed. I went over the evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I thought of the consequences at all.
The old Jim was a little bit irritated. He vaguely sensed he wasn't being any too smart. Fred didn't even do that. And Fred had no thought about the consequences at all. He said, I'd commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come I would drink again. They had said that though I did raise a defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen and more. For what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge were not helping these strange mental blank spots. I had never been able to understand people who said that a problem had been hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. Two of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me, and they grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me if I thought myself alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality such as I'd exhibited in Washington was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experiences by the dozen. And this process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Bottom of page 43, last paragraph. Once more. The alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. Now then I'm convinced. Now then I know about insanity. Now then I know why I can't stay sober on my own. Now I know why I've got to have a power greater than I am and greater than human power if I want to remain sober. Still don't like the idea, not one little bit. And in many cases we don't think that God could do this for us. And when we reach this stage of the game and we see this really hopeless condition of the mind and of the body, and we're faced with this thing, many of us are in a complete quandary. Based upon old ideas, based upon things that we've learned during our lifetime, based upon things we've done. I know in my particular case, I didn't think God would do this for me. Because remember, I was going to go to hell for lying, cheating, stealing, drinking whiskey, and I knew God wasn't going to help me out at all. Many of us in the past have viewed people who accepted spirituality as a way of life as weak people. And we'd sometimes drive down the street on Sunday morning, we'd see them going up the church house into church, then we'd say, look at them weak suckers. If they're as strong as we are, they wouldn't have to be going there and praying. Something's probably not there anyhow. Many of us have spent hours in bars discussing religion and spirituality. And one day you're an agnostic, and I'll say, fine, I'll be an atheist. And we'll talk all afternoon on this subject. Next time I see you, you say I'm an atheist, and I say, great, I'll be an agnostic this time, and talk all afternoon. It's kind of like sex. We spend a hell of a lot of time talking about it and know very little about it. And we reach this point of the game, and we're faced with this thing. If God don't do this for us, we're going to die. And we think it just cannot happen. That it's an impossibility. That for people like me, it could not occur in my life. My preachers always told me that, Charlie, you got to have faith. He said, if you got faith, everything will be all right. I never could find faith. I never had faith. And here, I think if we had not been for the next chapter, again, I would have been absolutely stopped. Bill realized how we feel. You know, he's alcoholic too. And he had antipathy and prejudice against anything spiritual or religious. And he didn't like this idea either. He didn't like the idea of being defeated and have to turn to a power greater than he is for help. And he knew how we were going to feel. And he wrote another chapter and he placed it in here, and I think it's just exactly where it's got to be. Because in a little while I'm going to have to make a decision. Now, I've already seen the powerlessness. I've already seen the power. And I'm going to have to decide between those two in just a little while in step 3. But I can't make that decision in step 3. Based upon what I knew before. I think one of the greatest things that AA has done for me, first, they let me have the concept of God as I understand it. And then they gave me a new understanding of God. And when they gave me the new understanding of God, then I could get on with the rest of this thing. But until I read and studied this next chapter, I was completely stopped right here. You know, I've learned today there's only one of 3 ways we can believe in God, really. One is to be an atheist. An atheist is one who says God does not exist. And if he really believes that God does not exist, then he believes that the human mind is the greatest power in the universe. And if he believes the human mind is the greatest power in the universe, then he has nowhere to turn to for help, no power greater than he is, and he must run his own show. He must make his own decisions, he must stand on his own 2 feet, and he must rule his own destiny. But an agnostic is an entirely different thing. An agnostic is one who believes that God exists, but he acts as if he doesn't. He doesn't turn to God to run the show. He doesn't turn to him to get direction. He stands on his own 2 feet, makes his own decisions, and runs his own show and rules his own destiny. He does exactly as the atheist does. But the difference is he believes that God exists. He just acts as if he doesn't. There's only one other way you could believe, and that is to be a true believer. And a true believer is one that believes God exists and acts as if he does. Doesn't try to run his own show. He turns to the power greater than he is to get help and direction in his life. He doesn't stand on his own 2 feet, and he doesn't rule his own destiny. And he receives the aid of a power greater than he is, and he knows that God exists. And you can only be one of those 3, really. And when I reached this point, I didn't know what I was. I wasn't sure what I was. But as I look back in my life today, there's never been a time in my life that I didn't believe God existed. It seems as though that's been a part of my knowledge from the longest time I can remember. But I most certainly acted as if he did not. When they told me in my Baptist church, they said, if you do these things, you're going to go to hell just sure as anything. And I wanted to do some of those things. And one day that preacher looked me straight in the eye and he said, to believe it is just as bad as it is to do it. And I thought, oh crap, because I've been believing it a long time. He said, thinking about it's as bad as doing it, and I've been thinking about it. But I didn't go to hell for thinking about it, so I thought, well, maybe I won't for doing it. And then I started doing it, and then I separated myself entirely from any God as I understand it. And thank God for this chapter. But it's going to give me a simple way to get from a point of being an agnostic or an atheist to being one who is a true believer. It will give me a simple little starting point. It tells me in the preceding chapters you've learned something of alcoholism. We hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. You know, we said in the beginning that the fellowship tends to change things. And the fellowship tends to add on, to delete from, to change around. Here in the big book, there's two simple little questions to determine whether you're alcoholic or not. If when you want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. My golly, the fellowship today has expanded on this until now we have a pamphlet that's got 44 questions in it. Joe and I are just so glad that Ebby didn't have the 44 questions when we went into Bill's kitchen. He'd sit down and said, Bill, has alcohol been hurting your reputation? Well, he hadn't had one for years. Then he said, has alcohol been screwing up your sex life? And he hadn't had any of that for years either. Two simple little questions. Now, if we answer these things in the eternity, and we decide that's what we are, it says to one who feels he is an atheist or an agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. The spiritual experience seems impossible. And that's exactly where I was. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death,
Step 1.
Or to live on a spiritual basis,
Step 2.
Are not always easy alternatives to face. But it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. And perhaps it's going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics, and our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. And I believe there's a difference between a drunken bum and an alcoholic. Now, a drunken bum pretty well doing what they want to do, and they don't really care. They are where they are because they have chosen to be there. But an alcoholic is an entirely different person. The alcoholic may be with a drunken bum, but the alcoholic doesn't want to be there. Alcoholics that I know have a code of morals. And most of them have a philosophy about life, and most of them know how to live. But we simply cannot do that. We tried to be moral. We tried to be philosophically comforted, but the needed power wasn't there. You know, all my life, I've hurt people and hurt people and hurt people, and I knew it was wrong. And I always said, I'm not going to do that again. And I turned right around and do it again over and over and over. I just did not have the power to not do those things. But if my morals, which were good, or if my philosophy of life, which was good, had been sufficient, I would have recovered from the disease. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral, and by golly, I did try to be. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might. But the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources as marshaled by the will were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. I'm finally going to be told what my problem is. Lack of power, that was my dilemma. And it must be true for all of us, because if we could have found the power elsewhere, we would never have become members of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I don't know if anybody that set out and took a first drink when they were 14 and said, I'm going to be a member of AA when I'm 32 years old. No, we came here because we had to. Bill tells us in another place that we were driven to AA under the lash of alcoholism. If we'd had the power to solve the problem, we would never have become members of Alcoholics Anonymous. I came here because there wasn't any place else to go. But we had to find a power by which we could live. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. You know, if I could have done it, I would have. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself which will solve your problem. Now, it didn't say which will help you solve your problem, but it will enable you to solve your problem. It said it will enable you to find a power which will solve your problem. Now, up until now, I've been looking at sobriety, and this thing said that isn't what it's about at all. The main object is to find the power. And if I can find the power, then the power will solve the problem. And you know, interestingly enough, my book never talks about alcohol anymore. From this page on, it talks about one thing and one thing only. How do you find the power? And if I can find the power, then the power will solve the problem. Now, in order to find the power, I've got to have some place to start. My preacher said you've got to have faith, and I didn't have any faith. I didn't believe God would do this for me. I didn't think that He would do anything that I ought to be able to do Himself. So I've got to have some point to start, to change from the atheist and the agnostic to the true believer, one who has found the power. And thank God my book never leaves me by myself. It tells me exactly how to start the procedure on page 47. Joe?
Okay. He's going to give us a simpler way to begin. We need to ask ourselves the one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself? You know, we don't have to have faith to start the AA program. All we have to do is to believe. As soon as a man can say he does believe, or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. Now, we're going to have to build a spiritual experience, and if we see it, be sure to read Appendix 2 on the spiritual experience. At the bottom of this page, he says, please be sure to read this.
Third time we've been asked to read that now.
And we can see that the spiritual structure is a spiritual experience. And how do we begin this? All we have to do is to believe. I didn't say that we had to have faith, but believing is the beginning. Now here, and the believing is the beginning, this is a basic principle of success, by the way, in which man succeeds at anything that he does. Everything begins when we believe. Believing is the beginning of anything we accomplish. We look at all the things that man has accomplished, the airplanes and the buildings and the satellites and all the things we have created. All of these things, actually, the beginning of these things were they begin when some man believed he could do it. This is the beginning of any task, and this is the limitation of our lives. Our success or failure is based on what we believe. If we, this is the limitation of our lives. We're not limited by other things, but we are the limit. Whatever we believe, we're going to decide on, we're going to act on, and we're going to produce in our lives. If we believe lies, we will act on these things, and these things will become part of our lives. So believing is the beginning, and it is the limitation of our lives, and anything that we can believe, we can achieve. So believing is the beginning. And he said believing is a cornerstone. You know, and whatever we believe, we're going to decide on, we're going to act on it. If we believe a lie, we're going to act on that lie. And when we believe a lie, we will run into the truth. We will always run into the truth. And whatever we do in our lives is based on what we believe. Success or failure. I see a lot of people, and we talk about people in the penitentiary today, and the beginning of their trouble is when they believed they could steal and get away with it. That was the beginning. You know, it wasn't what they did, it was what they believed.
They believed wrong.
They believed wrong. So they decided to steal, and they got caught. See, while they was believing they could steal, the police was believing they could catch them. And the police won, you know, okay. But whatever we believe, we're going to finally be manifested in our lives. Now, we don't have to have faith. Believing comes before. Faith comes afterwards. We have to believe to begin. We believe, and once we believe, based on what we believe, then we're going to say we're going to make a decision. Decision is based on what we believe. And once we believe, and it's like a domino theory, the believing brings on decision. And the decision breaks down actions, which is based on what we believe. And once we take the actions, we get results from the actions. And once we get results, then we know, which is faith. But the second time we go to do something, we go back on faith. But the first time we do it, we go on believing. You say a man's going to overcross the street and fix his automobile, and I'm having trouble with my car, and Charlie tells me that guy's a good mechanic. I don't know nothing about the guy. The guy hasn't done anything work for me. I don't have any faith in him. But I can believe Charlie. And if I believe Charlie, then one of these days I make a decision, and I carry my car over to him, and he does some work on my car. And when I get my car and it runs good, then I don't have to believe Charlie anymore. I got faith in the man. And the second time I go back to him, I don't go back on belief, I go back on faith. But the very first time, I can't go on faith. I have to go start off on believing. And this is the only way we can start. You know, if we believe we're agnostic, we already believe. If we're atheists, we have to become willing to believe. Now we can do that. He said this is a cornerstone. Remember he says willingness was the foundation of this program, and now believing is the cornerstone of this structure we're going to build. This all we have to do to start within the AA program is to believe. And it's easy to look at other people and come to believe.
You know, Joe said this all starts when some man believes he can do that. And I always like to correct him and say, or when some woman believes she can do that also. In either case, it doesn't make any difference. It all starts with belief. And I love to look at the words. He said, do I now believe you, or am I even willing to believe? You don't have to believe if you can become willing to believe. And this opens the door for the agnostic or the atheist, either one. The agnostic already believes. He just acts as if he doesn't. The atheist disbelieves. All he's got to do is become willing to believe. And this opens the door for everybody. This is the starting point to believe. And the book said that was great news for us. For we'd assume we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. See, the preacher kept saying, son, all you got to do is have faith. Well, I couldn't have faith because I just barely believed. And the book said, I don't got to have faith. I don't got to know. I just got to believe. That's all belief is. Belief is nothing more than suspicion. Belief is up-front information. Faith is after-the-fact information. And in the beginning, at anything that's new to me, all I can do is believe. And I'll believe one way or the other. I'll either believe I can or believe I can't. Now, if I believe I can't, I'll never change. I'll stay exactly the same way I am. But if I believe I can, then I can change. And based on my belief, I make my decisions and take my action. I get results. And if I believe wrong, I'll get the wrong results. Well, then I go back and change my belief and try again. And after a while, I begin to develop faith. Now, my book will again give me an example or two. Always gives us examples of what he's talking about, page 51. It's going to show us a case or two of what could be done on belief. It said this world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than all the millenniums which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of men in those days was equal to the best of today. Yet in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. You know, almost everything you and I use today has been invented within the last 100 years. And I used to think it's because we were smarter. They said, no, that isn't true. The people that lived thousands of years ago, their intellect, their minds were just as good as they are today. But their minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. They were not allowed to believe differently. If they believed differently, they got in trouble. It wasn't too long ago in the United States, we were burning people at the stake because they were witches. They believed differently. They'd throw you in jail. They'd hang you if you believed different. And therefore, people could not invent and develop new things because they were fettered into the old ideas, and therefore they didn't develop anything new. Just within the last 100 years that we've been allowed to really open our minds, and we've seen great progress in the realm of the material. It tells me here that some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. You go back to the days of Columbus, and he was really important for us down where we live, you know. Back in the days of Columbus 400 years ago, practically everybody in the then known civilized world lived in Europe or lived on the northern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, most of them, somewhere in that area. And they had found that in a place called the West Indies, they had lots of silks and spices and gold and things that people really wanted. And they found a way to get there, but they had to get there by land. They had to go by horse or camel or elephant or something like that. And it took literally years to get there and back. And the people began to search for a new route. They said, man, that takes too long. Let's find us a new way to get there and get there faster. And somebody then said, well, you could probably sail there. And they said, oh, no, you can't. They said, to get to the other side of it, said, man, if you sail out across the ocean, you'll sail right off the edge of this sucker because the world is flat. And I guess the reason they believed that, people would sail out there and they didn't come back, and they figured they'd sail right off the edge of the earth. Now, Columbus came along, and Columbus said, now look, if you're wanting a new route, he said, I believe you could sail there. He said, I believe that the world is round. And he said, I believe that you could get to the East Indies by sailing west. Now, Columbus had to be alcoholic. That's all there is to it. You would have to be an extremely stubborn, bull-headed individual to believe in the face of all the rest of the world to believe differently. And who else but an alcoholic could think that you could go east by sailing west? Columbus really believed that he could do that. We think there's other reasons he's alcoholic also, Joe.
It's obvious, you know, that this man had the ability to believe against everybody else on the face of this earth. And that's got to be an alcoholic. And the only way you can change anything, whatever we believe, we become. We were always going to become whatever we believe. That is a principle. So the only way we can change anything or ourselves, the only way we're going to change is we have to believe different. If we believe the same, we will remain the same. We will have to believe different in order to change. And this is the principle he's teaching us here in the book. Columbus believed different. He changed the world. He changed the economics of the world. He changed the globe. He changed the lives of everybody on the face of this earth since his time, simply because he was able to believe different. Now, as Charlie said, he had to be a hard-headed, self-centered alcoholic to do this. And he had to be an alcoholic because when he left, he didn't know where he was going. That's his problem. And when he got there, he didn't know where he was. And when he got back, he didn't know where he had been. But what really makes him an alcoholic, a woman financed the whole trip. And he died in jail. He did die in jail. Now, when he left, you know, he just left on what he believed. And Charlie and I, we always kind of speculate about this guy. And we kind of suspect that he believed the world was round. But we just imagined the first night out, he had one of them sailors on the front of the boat with a lantern. And he said, if you see the edge of this damn thing, you holler out. But he believed it was round. But when he left on basically what he believed. That's all what he left on. And he took a decision, he took the actions, and the results, when he came back, he knew. And when he came back, the whole world changed what they believed. The whole world changed. And they all believed the world was round after he came back. And it was based on one man believing that. It changed the whole world.
You know, Columbus followed a certain procedure that mankind has always followed for success. The first thing he did was to believe differently. He believed that the world was round. But that didn't do him any good whatsoever, because he's still standing on the edge of the ocean. One day he made a decision. He said, I'm going to go find out whether it's round or whether it's flat. But that didn't do him any good, because he's still standing on the shore of the ocean. One day he began to take some action. And he went to people and tried to find money. And he went to the King of Portugal. He went to lots of places before he finally ended up with the Queen of Spain. And he sweet-talked her out of the money. And he took that money and he bought some ships. And he put provisions in the ships. And he got the crews. And they began to sail across the ocean. And sure enough, as the result of that action, they found land on the other side. And he named it the East Indies to start with. Later it was changed to the West Indies. But he found land on the other side. Now then, he knew that the world was round. He knew you wouldn't sail off the edge of it. They turned right around and they came back. And he went back to the Queen of Spain. And she said, Columbus, where's the gold, the silk, and the spices you promised you would bring me? And he said, honey, I didn't find any. But he said, if you will finance me again, I'll go back, and this time I'll get them. And she did, and he did. Now the difference is, this time when he went back, he didn't have the man on the front of the boat with a lantern looking for the edge of it. This time he went back on faith. He went back on knowledge. He knew this time. But before, he only went on suspicion. He only went on belief. And we're going to find that our 12 steps are set up in exactly the same thing. Just exactly the same way. It is a method of success that's been proven millions of times. In step 2, we come to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. In step 3, we make a decision to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood Him. But those two things don't get us anywhere, because we're still standing on the shore of the ocean. In steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, we take action. And at the end of step 9, we get the promises in the big book. The promises are the results of the action that we take. Then in step 12, we know, having had a spiritual awakening, we now carry this message to others that still suffer. The 12 steps are set up exactly like man has used, mankind or womankind has always used to succeed at something new. And all you and I got to do is the same thing Columbus did. We got to start with belief. Then we decide, then we act, and then we get results. Now our problem is all of us wants to get results before we act. We want somebody to prove this to us before we will make the effort. And that's not anything new. Mankind's always been that way either. It's always been that way. We've always said, I would rather you show me rather than me have to do it. Or prove it to me and then I'll do it. And the next little example in the book is designed to show us that proof is not always right. Sometimes we prove things and it turns out that the proof itself is wrong. On page 51, last paragraph, it said, we ask ourselves this. Are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved man could never fly? Had not people said God had reserved this privilege to the birds? Now, the Wright brothers flew their airplane, and somebody called this newspaper man, and they said, quick, put it out over the wires of the world. The Wright brothers have flown a powered aircraft. And that newspaper man said, you crazy as hell. He said, if I did that, they'd fire me for telling that lie. Because everybody had proven man could never fly a powered aircraft. Now, the Wright brothers came along and changed. They changed the whole world. They changed in space. They changed everything based upon their belief. And it just literally destroys my mind today to even think about these two guys. They were not mathematical geniuses. They were not engineers. They were not flight people at all. They were both bicycle mechanics. They were both high school dropouts. Now, they were so dumb that they believed that they could build an airplane that would fly. Everybody else had proven that could not be done. And Orville and Wilbur built this thing and took it out to Kitty Hawk, and the first time they tried to fly it, crashed. And can't you just see Orville turning to Wilbur and said, "Wilbur, damn you, I told you this thing wouldn't work." Wilbur said, "Let's take it back, modify it, try it again." And he took it back and changed it a few times, and all of a sudden one day that sucker flew. Proof is not always correct in it. The best mathematical minds in the world today can prove to you beyond any shadow of a doubt that a bumblebee cannot fly. A bumblebee's got a little short fat body, got little short stubby wings, and based upon the lift that he can produce with his wings and the weight of his body, it's impossible for him to lift himself off the ground. But the bumblebee can't read. He believes that he can fly. And based upon his belief, he takes decisions, takes action, and he just flies all over the country. Don't you know he's going to be in a hell of a shape if they ever teach him how to read? Okay, it gives me a way to start. My preacher said you got to have faith. My book says you don't have to have faith, you just got to believe. And then follow the procedure, and then you can develop faith. It's told me I'm going to have the power greater than I am. It's told me you started with this simple idea or this simple belief that a power greater than ourselves can help us out. And if I know those two, then what I need to know is, okay, where am I going to find it? Now, I know I've looked for God all my life. And as a kid growing up, I always knew that God stood on a cloud somewhere. And he was a tall, elderly gentleman. He had long, flowing white robes. He had a golden halo around his head, and sun rays were shooting out from it all the time. And I looked, and I looked, and I looked, and I never did see God. I looked for him in the birds and the bees and the trees, and I never could find him. And the reason I never could find him is I believe I was looking in the wrong place. My book will tell me exactly where to find this power on page 55. It said, "Yet we've been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world, people who rose above their problems. They said God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We had seen spiritual release, but like to tell ourselves it wasn't true, and I think we've all seen it. You know, I've seen people have some great traumatic happening in their life, and it seems as though they could just rise above that and go right on with their life. And I'd say, what have they got that I don't have? And somebody'd say, well, they've got God. And I'd say, oh, bro, I don't believe that. I never believed that at all. And the book says actually we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other it is there. For faith in a power greater than ourselves, and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup, just as much as the feeling we had for a friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found, and it was so with us. Now, my book is telling me that God dwells within me. And as I look back in my life today, it seemed to me as though all my life I've had some form of intelligence or knowledge inside me that seemed to automatically know what I should be doing and what I shouldn't be doing, that seemed to automatically tell me the right things to do and the things that I should not do. Now, some people might want to call that innate intelligence. Others might want to refer to it as common sense. Some may want to call it the soul, and others may want to refer to it as the conscience, and I don't think it really makes any difference. But it seems as though every one of us, deep down inside, we have always known these things. We've always known how to live. We just never could live up to those things. I believe that God dwells within every human being today. If he dwells within me, he most certainly must dwell within you. And people keep saying you've got to find God, I don't think you've got to find God. I don't think God's lost. If you've been here since the beginning of time, it's pretty hard to get lost. I think that God dwells within me, but I've never been able to use that God because it's been obscured by pomp, by calamity, by worship of other things, by money, power, sex, and prestige. And I've always raced after those things and never did really listen to that inner voice. And I believe today that if I could just peel this other crap away, if I could just get rid of the garbage, if I could just get rid of the pomp and the worship and the calamity and the money and the power, and just if I could just get all that stuff out of the way, I think the knowledge of how to live will automatically come to the surface. You know what I've learned through this fellowship and through this program is, I didn't have to go find any more books to read. I didn't have to know anything more about spirituality than I knew the day I came to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I used the steps and peeled the garbage out of the way, the knowledge on how to live was there. And it came to the surface. And for the first time in my life, I could begin to use it. And I think that's God. You know, it's a knowledge that I'm not aware of up here, but it's always been there. Time to time in my life, I've experienced it. Always when I'd start to do something that was wrong, I'd say, Charlie, you oughtn't do that. You better not do that. You're going to get in trouble. And I'd go right ahead and do it and get in trouble every time. I've always known what to do, what not to do, how to live and how not to live, but I just never could do it. But that wasn't exciting like those other things were. And I think we all have that ability, and I think we all have that knowledge, and I think that's the only difference between you and I and the rest of the animals in this world. Is we have that knowledge, we have the ability to think, we have the ability to reason, we have the ability to determine what's right and what's wrong, and how we should and should not conduct our life. And I think that's the humanity in all of it, and I think that's God as I understanding, that dwells deep inside me somewhere. Where it came from, I have no idea. But to me, that's God. In my book, it says that's the only place I'm going to find it. Now, if I know what I need is the power, and I know how to start, and that is by believing, and I know where that power is, then the only thing I've got left to do now is get with it and find that power. See, this chapter gave me an entire, complete new understanding of my God as I understand Him. Based on my old understanding, I could go no further. Thank God for the chapter we agnostics. Now then, I can make the decision I'm going to be called upon to make in just a little while.
Today, if we have completed these doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters, we have the information basically for the first 2 steps. This chapter, we found out that we were powerless, and we came to believe in a power greater than ourselves to restore us to sanity. And this brings us to the third and final and beginning, and really the main purpose of the big book. The main purpose of the book is to show us how to find this power. And this is contained in the recovery section of how it works into action and work with others, the 10 steps of recovery. And as Bill got to this point, the story John talked about today, he had drafted the first 4 chapters, and I think Frank was talking about a couple of weeks in this earlier draft how they wrote this. It said it was something like 44 different times it had to be Ruth typed it over to get it. But he was faced with, at this point, writing on how, the main purpose of the book. And as the story goes, he said the night that he come to this point, he felt very inadequate, so he asked God for guidance. And this is when he wrote, after a period of time, he picked up his pad and he wrote how it works, including the 12 steps. And this was the really pivotal point in the book. And as we read it, understand it, and study it, we can see that, how he is beginning here in the chapter. This is how it works. This is how do you find that power.
I'm not surprised that this is called how it works. We looked at the problem, we've looked at the solution, and the only thing left to look at is the practical program of action necessary to find that solution. Now, when Bill prayed and meditated that night, he laid down the pad and pencil, and in about 20 minutes picked it up and began to write. In about a half an hour, he wrote how it works. I'm going to read it to you, but what I'm going to read is different than what you got in your book. What I'm going to read is the original, how it works. Before other people got hold of it and before any changes were made in it, it's exactly as Bill wrote it that night. And there will be a purpose behind this, and we'll see that purpose in just a few minutes. I'm going to try to point out the differences with the tone of my voice, if I can. He said, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our directions. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a way of life which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have, and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to follow directions. At some of these, you may balk. You may think you can find an easier, softer way. We doubt if you can. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that you are dealing with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. Without help, it is too much for you. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. You must find him now. Half measures will avail you nothing. You stand at the turning point. Throw yourself under his protection and care with complete abandon. Now we think you can take it. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as your program of recovery. Number one, admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Number two, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Number three, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care and direction of God as we understood him. Number four, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Number five, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Number six, we're entirely willing that God remove all these defects of character. Number seven, humbly, on our knees, ask him to remove our shortcomings, holding nothing back. Number eight, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make complete amends to them all. Number nine, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Number 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Number 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our contact with God, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. Number 12, having had a spiritual experience, as the result of this course of action, we tried to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. You may exclaim, what an order, I can't go through with it. Well, do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we're willing to grow along spiritual lines. Principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic,
the doctor's opinion,
the chapter to the agnostic,
chapter 4,
and our personal adventures before and after.
This is Bill's story, more about alcoholism,
have been designed to sell you three pertinent ideas. A, that you are alcoholic and cannot manage your own life.
Step 1.
B, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism.
Step 2.
C, that God can and will.
Still at this point, step 2.
If you are not convinced on these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point, or else throw it away.
Now here, this night as Bill laid out the 12 steps for the first time, he was able to broaden on the concepts of the original steps that they were using. And he's saying here, if you have read the first 4 chapters of the book in the doctor's opinion, from these 4 chapters in the doctor, you should have come to 2 conclusions. And the first 2 steps are 2 basic conclusions that we alcoholics can see. We can choose one or the other one. We have 2 choices. And these first 4 chapters have taken the time today. We want to outline these 2 conclusions. That we're alcoholics, and that we're powerless over alcohol in our lives of man, and that there is a power greater than ourselves that could restore us to sanity. And the first 2 steps are not steps that we work. They put us in a position for the action steps. The recovery steps are just going to begin. And it's just like I said, it's like any other problem we have. The first step, we went to the doctor is a diagnosis. And he finds the problem. And once we find the problem, then from the problem we can determine a solution. We can write a prescription. You go to the doctor, he signs the problem, then he writes your prescription. And you stand there in the doctor's office, you got 2 vital pieces of information. You know what's wrong with you didn't know before you went to the doctor. You know what's wrong with you, but when he tells you, you don't feel any better. You still feel just as sick. And then after he tells you what's wrong with you, then he writes your prescription. So you got 2 things. You got the prescription in your hand, you got the solution in your hand, and you don't feel any better. In fact, Charlie says you feel worse because the doctor's going to take you some money by that time. So you probably feel worse than you did. But you're in a position to carry out the treatment plan. And you will start recovering when you carry out the actions. When you go get the prescription filled and start doing what he tells you, you'll begin to improve at that point. But these 2 things put us in position for the treatment plan. They put us in position for our recovery. Step 3 is the first therapeutic step. The other 2 steps, but these 2 things are essential. Now, Charlie and I knew a great friend of ours, Paul, who was in the program in the early days in Akron. And we talk about this because we can see what is happening here at this time when Bill did this. Before these steps were written at night. The Alcoholics Anonymous, the AA members, they were the AA members, the first 100, before they got the name AA. When someone got a contact for a new prospect, they would go out and they would visit you in the hospital or wherever you were in your home. And they would make several visits. And this individual would sit down and talk to you and tell you his story. He would tell you about his step 1. He would tell you about him being an alcoholic. And that would tell you about his disease. And then you would be able, as an alcoholic, to identify with him and to see yourself in him. Maybe you could see that you were in the same shape. This is the first step. And he would do this on several visits. And after he got you to see that you were powerless over alcohol in your life was unmanageable, then he would continue. He would ask you about your spiritual concepts. He would ask you, do you believe in God? He would qualify you for the second step. And once he was sold on the idea that you were powerless over alcohol and that you did believe in God, then he would take you to the AA group. When he took you to the AA group, he said, well, this man, I have qualified this man, and I want to sponsor him in the AA group. This is the way they did it. When you come into the AA group back in those days before the steps were written, you started out on step 3. They didn't have steps 1 and 2. Step 3 was the program. The program started out with step 3. Well, quite naturally, when the book was written, there was no way they could go out on the visit and do steps 1 and 2. So the first 4 chapters of the doctor's opinion are there to do steps 1 and 2. This is why we can't start off on chapter 5. We have to take steps 1 and 2 that put us in a position for the recovery program, which begins in step 3. And he says in the very next statement, if you are convinced if you're not convinced of these 2 issues, you ought to reread the book or throw it away. Because if you don't have steps 1 and 2, then you take the next statement and say, if you are convinced, then we are now at step 3. And we'll start out on the recovery program, which we start recovering in step 3. The steps 1 and 2 are the foundation for our recovery.
In steps 3 through 12 in the big book, they'll always tell you 3 things. They tell you why you need to take a step, they tell you how to take it, and they tell you what the result will be. And every one of those steps requires some kind of action. But it never tells you how to take step 1 and 2. Because you really don't take 1 and 2. They're conclusions of the mind that we reach based on the information in the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters, the textbook idea. By reading and studying that information, we have become aware of 1 and 2. And then 3 is to make a decision. And I used to read that and I'd think, and it'd say, we're now at step 3, and I'd say, well, where the hell did 1 and 2 go? And finally, when I saw this original manuscript, I could see what Bill had in mind. I think also it's obvious that Bill did not intend for these steps to be a set of suggestions. He intended them to be a set of directions. He specifically stated so twice in how it works, and he used directions in step 3. And when he gave it to the other members, that's when the crap hit the fan. That's when they said, Bill, what do you mean telling alcoholics what they got to do? You can't tell alcoholics what they got to do. They won't do nothing. And I'm sure another group of individuals said, Bill, you didn't tell them hard enough. You know, we got both factors in AA even today. And one guy, he said, what do you mean talking about God in there so much? He said, let's get that God crap out of here. Here he is. He's right up here behind this guy named Jim Burwell. Look at him. Look at him with that long stem pipe. Look at that cold-eyed sucker. If he's not an atheist, I never saw him. Look at him. He's the one raised so much hell about God in here. And some people, I'm sure, said, Bill, you didn't talk enough about God. Talk about it more. And they fought, back and forth, up and down, round and around, and they almost blew the whole book project right there. Now, at the suggestion of a non-alcoholic psychiatrist, they made some changes. Bill did not want to. He fought to the last drop to not change it, because he kept saying, this is what I got after prayer and meditation. This is what came to me from God. He said, I don't want to change it. But he finally saw they'd get no further if he didn't at least bend a little bit. And the non-alcoholic psychiatrist said, why don't you change it from directions to suggestions? He said, probably more people would use your book. Nobody likes to be told what they have to do. And he said, well, you keep saying you. He said, use the word we. He said, tell them what you had to do, not what they're going to have to do. And he said, well, you keep saying must. He said, change that to ought. And he said, I believe people will be more, will accept the book better. And today we don't know. You know, if they hadn't made those changes, instead of having 1.5 million worldwide today, we may have 10 million. But by the same token, if they hadn't made those changes, instead of 1.5 million worldwide today, we might have 10,000. Who knows? Nobody will ever know. None of us are that smart. We simply know that's the history behind this part of the book. But Bill agreed to make the changes. But then Bill said, from here on out, I will be the authority of the book. He said, if I'm going to write it, the rest of it, I'm not going to go through this kind of stuff anymore. He said, if I'm going to have to fight and argue with it, I'm not going to mess with it at all. And they gave Bill permission to go ahead and finish up the rest of the book with him becoming the final authority on what it would say. Now, what Bill didn't know, or what they didn't know, but what Bill knew was that on the very next page, he was going to start talking about directions again. And he talked about directions all the way through the rest of the book. And when he took it out and how it works, and then he turned around and put it back in through the rest of the book, it ruined some of the continuity of the book. So we'll see references to directions all the way through the book. We'll see statements that say you must, and we'll see statements that say you. And he agreed to get them off his back. And he's an alcoholic, remember. He's going to have his way, and he got his way, except on a couple pages in the book. I think that's as far as we want to go tonight. We appreciate you all being here. You've been a very attentive group, and we appreciate it. We've loved it. Hope you have. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Thanks for being here.